In this video, we're going to be talking about Tales of the Shire and development of it. My name is Mustafa. I am a game developer, an indie game developer currently. I have worked in the AAA industry doing administrative work as well as QA work, but right now I do solo indie development work, and I am with Ojiro.
Hi, I'm Ojiro. I'm a software developer for games, most pretty much solely on the programming side. So programming tools, whatever kind of build and release, the fringe of making games kind of side of things.
We're going to be talking about Tales of the Shire, which came out recently, completely flopped, getting the worst reviews. Even IGN couldn't even give it a 7. They gave it like a 4 out of 10. And you
I
know
saw
you're in
Asmongold gave
trouble.
it a 2.
You know you're in trouble when IGN gives you a 4,
Oh
especially
man.
especially when you have a Sweet Baby Ink connected with your game and they give you a 4 out of 10. Disclaimer, I did not play the game at all, but I did look into it. I've watched multiple reviews on it, and I tried finding reviews that were being unbiased. Like, they were gamers that were really into the cozy game genre. And so these were gamers that like to play these type of games. To explain real quick, since I'm getting ahead of myself, so it seems like the game is within the cozy genre, which doesn't really mean anything. I mean, it's a genre that doesn't really describe itself too well. I guess the best way to describe it is it's kind of like a life sim type of thing where you do farming and cooking and you build relationships with the other characters. How
Yeah, I
do
feel
you
like
have any
cozy's
input
kind of
on
a
what cozy even
catch-all.
means?
I don't even know. I feel like cozy's like a catch-all for these things where they don't really decide the idea of the game. Though there are some games that I would call cozy where it's just like, oh, this is like just fun to play, like clicker games. Like I was playing after this a Steam summer sale, Tower Wizard. Played it for like an hour, and you're just like clicking stuff and upgrading things. And I was like, oh, this feels cozy. But I feel like when people say cozy for a game, it's that they didn't figure out what kind of genre they wanted to build, and they just kind of put components together, and they were like, good enough. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
most of
because
the games I see that are like within that genre are basically like time wasters, and it's like a very pleasant art direction. I think the art direction is usually the main thing that these games have in common. It's like very like pastel colors, very calm looking, and the gameplay is just built around wasting your time and doing very simple things that aren't too challenging.
yeah,
So yeah, so anyways, this game is developed by, just to be very brief for those of you who are unaware, it's developed by this studio called Weta Productions. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong because the E and the A both have some accent marks over it, but
yeah, I have no
Weta
idea.
Productions. And basically this studio has a background of working on physical effects for the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, not even digital effects, like physical props and effects. And then eventually, I think it's like 2014. Yeah, 2014 they made a game division and then started doing like art assets for certain games, like contract work. And then they've made like a few AR games that aren't very big, and this is their first big game. Like the
Big.
yeah, yes, yeah, big game. And so they use the Lord of the Rings license, which I'm assuming due to their connection through doing the props and all that, they were able to get the license. And yeah, the game came out. It's a complete mess. Just to quickly summarize things that I've seen in the reviews, like graphics are terrible, especially for the Switch and Switch 2. The PC has slightly better graphics. Like, it sounds like, I mean, it's clearly made by people who don't know how to make games because it has a lot of problems that are present in games from like 20 years ago. You know, like not having a mini map, lack of proper gameplay loop. One reviewer said that the fun didn't start until the last 5 hours of the game, but she didn't say how long the game was. But she said in the last 5 hours, it just suddenly got fun. And a lot of fetch quests. The world feels empty. The main thing that's driving the game is the relationship system, not a romance system, but a relationship system for the friends. And most of the characters are very grumpy. So the
And
narrative
ugly.
is the main part of the game. But yeah, so that's to summarize what the game is about. Try to be brief about it. But I sent this article to Ojiro about the development of the game. This is an article by The Verge. I'll probably put on the screen for a little bit. But basically, it goes in depth as to all sorts of problems that they had with the development. And it's clear that leadership was really messed up. Like they had to switch leadership, and leadership got worse once they switched leadership. People got laid off. The team was very small to begin with. It seems like they had somewhere between 30 and 40 people at max. And in the middle of the article, just out of the blue, there's a complaint about lack of diversity, saying that the 26 people that they have in when the game launched, they had 26 developers, 5 of them are non-male, and this results to a lack of diverse voices being heard during key meetings.
They did have a lack of diverse thought because they didn't have smart people in there to begin with, because then they could have probably put the game together better. And there's some like terrible lore breaks in the very beginning of the game from just like watching some gameplay footage where I was just like, how can you guys say that you liked Lord of the Rings? Like if you've got this like right out the bat, it's just like, huh, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know if you noticed the character, it's like, oh, where are you from? And it's like, oh, I'm from the Prancing Pony from Bree. And it's like, the Prancing Pony's an inn. That's like saying, I'm from La Quinta from Atlanta. And it's like, no, like, do you guys even watch these shows?
See,
Like,
that's
what?
that's what happens when you specifically hire a a narrative consultant that doesn't know anything about narrative, and definitely is not a specialist in the lore that you're working on. Like you'd want to, at the very least, if you want to like hire a narrative consultant and you're working on Lord of the Rings specifically, you want to have a consultant that has read through all the books and is very familiar with.
Well, it's even just like the first 30 minutes of the first movie, where it's like, dude, you could have phoned it in, but it seems like they were just like, oh, Prancing Pony, Bree, got it. That's where you're from. And it's like, no, like Gandalf is like, this is where we're gonna meet in the very beginning of the movie, and they were just like, that's a city, and like, yeah, they just whoever wrote the dialogue, I don't know if it was Sweet Baby or like what they actually did, but I can tell you that none of the people that played the game, because like generally with any game near release, everyone plays through it once, like if you can for those smaller studios. So the fact that everyone played through it and they were just like, yep, they're from the Prancing Pony, that or you had people there that were just like, this game is such a train wreck. Let's just leave it in. Because I could see that too, where if I was working on a title and I'm like, this thing's gonna flop badly, like I'm just trying to stay employed because of the bad job market, and just been like, yeah, go ahead, writer, go ahead and say that they came from the Prancing Pony. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is that the majority of people had, they have very little knowledge of, the IP, and the few people who did know a little bit made the other developers think, okay, well, we'll just leave it to them. They know. I don't know anything.
That or their IP knowledge came from Rings of Power, which would technically could be true.
That can be,
Yeah,
yes.
that's a show I tried. I couldn't power through it.
I
That show was
didn't
terrible.
give it a chance. I knew from the get-go.
I turned it on and then I was like, I'll just clean the house while this is going on. And like there was a point where I was like, I don't even want this on in the background. It's so bad. But I digress. I would bring up whenever we hear like Sweet Baby Inc. working on places, Sweet Baby Inc. and other consultant firms, they don't have the ability to make a game terrible. They are a symptom of terrible leadership. And if I'm sure you'll link the Verge article in the description. And from the get-go, this whole article, it talks about how bad the management and the leadership of this company was for
Mhm.
years.
Yeah.
And then once they brought that new leadership in to really take over the studio, it just got worse because you were bringing in, it's not someone that cared about games, but someone that was like, oh, I'm a career manager. And just because someone's good at managing at a place like, I think this one's from 2K Games. So, like one of the really big places. And then
Mhm.
you're asking them to take over a really tiny studio. And I rarely see that work because I've seen some place like heck, I've been at some places where we've brought in some leader from one of those big companies and they're used to this huge layer of middle management to basically filter down all their nonsense. But when you work with them closely, you're like, not only do you not know what you're doing, but it's kind of a coin flip on if they're charismatic enough to even like get people excited. Because you can get more junior people excited with an incompetent manager if there's just some charisma there. But then there's just some folks where it's just they talk and you're just like, you have no idea what you're talking about. I know you're not playing our game. Like, I know you don't care about any of this. I know you're getting paid a fortune to be here in salary and stock. And they just make tasks for people. And this whole years of this development is just like a minimum 50 hours a week of work where they're constantly like trying to hit new deadlines. They don't actually hire people that are experienced at any level. Like, and they've got years to hire these people. They took a long time to hire the latest. Was it their director that they hired? Where it was they were just like a total
Yes.
tire fire.
Yeah, the director. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
2023. They hired the new director, and that made things worse.
yeah. So like they've had the time to bring in people to be like, we need someone really senior to come in and really try and get this out faster with higher quality. And I will say though, I think the game has performed way above my expectations for it. I expected it to be a really like next to no sales, but they peaked at like 6,000 people concurrent on Steam, which is way more than I thought they were going to. It's still a failure
Yeah, yeah.
by every measurement that we've looked at, but it's not like catastrophic. Though I don't see how with this kind of performance, they still want to make more games, but it's like, okay, you've had all these years to develop this. You can't hide it anymore because the game is out. How are you going to get funding? Because this game is not going to fund your future development.
Yeah.
So I don't see how
Yeah, the
like
game
there's
was
so much in this article.
the game was announced, I believe it said 2022, and so that means it was in development, you know, possibly 2021, and maybe even 2020. So that's 4 or 5 years of development. And it says a lot of the people that they hired had no experience working on any games, which, I mean, that can be fine if there's like mentorships to like guide the people who've never made a game before.
But especially if you're starting out small, like you can have a team where you don't really know kind of what you're doing. And if the scale of your game isn't terribly big, you can still succeed. But it seems like with this, like if you watch the game play, it feels like a lot of stuff is kind of just tacked on there and like it's not a coherent flow. So like I feel like just looking at the whole thing where I'm just like I don't feel like you guys decided what the game was going to be. I hear at least one feature got cut with these like button currency that they were trying to do. They talk about it in this article where it's like, oh, we wanted people to eat the food and then the button would burst because they were so happy. And I'm just like, dude, what is this game supposed to be? Because you put in a farming mechanic and then there's a cooking mechanic and then there's a lot of talking to people, but the world's really boring. I was the one thing where I was like, okay, how are you going to do this that I had any interest in was this feature where the birds lead you to the next waypoint. And I was like, okay, let's see how they do this. I figured the bird would just like fly in front and then like hover around to try and get your attention. And it was one of the most worthless like direction giving things because the bird would go to a point and then it would fly away. It wouldn't fly to the next point. So I was just like, where the hell is the next point? And then I'm trying to like I'm watching Asmongold play and I'm like, okay, where's
Oh,
this
that's your problem.
bird?
You're watching Asmongold play.
Hey, he's not great at games. I'm not great at games either. So it fits for me. But like even when I was seeing that in action, where it was just like, okay, you guys had an idea here. Like you really should have just had this bird like fly to this point and then turn back like a hummingbird or something. Cause
Mhm.
one of those birds that can be static in air. And they were just like, no, we'll just play this animation at this point. Like every time you need to go to these waypoints. And it's just like, but you didn't, it's confusing.
Yeah,
And if you don't see if you don't see where it goes, then like, I don't know. It was poorly put together. It
yeah.
was just
The reviews
not
I've been
particularly good.
watching, like they've all basically had the exact same complaints. Like it seemed like they were reading off each other's scripts, but they were all saying that due to the lack of mini map, they would constantly have to go into the open up the big map that's full screen and then recalibrate where they're going, and then start moving again. And then once they get lost again, they have to open the map all over again. Like this should not be an issue in game design in 2025. This has been figured out decades ago.
Clearly, they needed more yellow paint. Like that would have solved everything, made it really clear. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like such a foundational thing. Like it's like you're in the Shire, which we'll talk about the lore side of things in a little
Yeah.
bit, where it's like you have a small area. Like you should be able to conceptually come up with an idea of a town where you can mentally map it out pretty quickly to say, oh, I understand where things are. And it didn't feel like that. I didn't feel like, oh, this is logically where this goes. That's logically where that goes. I feel like it's like, game designer's first world map kind of thing,
Yeah.
where they put it together and you're like, okay, this isn't very good.
But before
A for
we
effort, I guess.
Before we transition over to talking about like the use of the IP, I want to like touch on one thing you were talking about as far as like leadership getting people excited. And this is something I've been trying to, emphasize on my channel because I hear so many people on YouTube. I don't want to say that like they don't know anything about game development because they're not game developers, but they're just kind of echoing the same thing that these studios are just hiring a bunch of people who don't know anything and therefore, go woke, go broke. And while there can be some truth to the fact that, these studios are hiring people who are incompetent, the underlying issue like that's more important than all that is leadership. Because even if you have a team of people who are skilled and know what they're doing, the game can still fall apart. Like we saw with the initiative, like they didn't release anything. Like their game got canceled. They've been working on Perfect Dark for how many years? And I know people who left Treyarch when I was at Treyarch. I know people who left there to go work at the initiative, and I know that they've been hiring people who have experience working on games, and it doesn't matter as long as the leadership is completely incompetent. Your skilled engineers, your skilled staff, like they don't matter if the leadership doesn't know what they're doing. And this also happened with people forget that Deviation Games existed. Like a bunch of people left Treyarch, including one of the studio heads, Dan Bunting, left Treyarch to make Deviation Games. And then they eventually showed up on stage with Sony. Sony was, saying that they're going to fund their game. We never got to see what game they're working on. Like they didn't even announce the game. We didn't get to see anything. And I think they were working on a game for 4 or so years and then they closed their doors. And that's what happens when you can have skilled game developers. And if the management are clueless, it all falls apart.
Yeah, I think one of the most extreme examples of this that we've seen in recent history was in places like Firewalk Studios with Concord, where people would talk about how like leadership didn't want to say no, you didn't want to say things were bad ideas, so you couldn't look at something and say that's stupid or that's bad. And in general, you wouldn't say your coworkers' work is stupid in a meeting, maybe personally in a one-on-one or a small group, but like you weren't allowed to like give candid feedback. And because they were more worried about feelings than they were of actually being a manager and a leader. And as a leader, you need to look at some ideas and be like, we're not going to do that. Like, and that's just not going to, no. You need to be able to say no to things. You need to be able to deal with people's feelings. Because in a creative field like this, you're going to come across a lot of people that are very in their feelings. And you need to set a boundary as a leader to be like, look, I understand you feel these certain ways, but there is a business expectation that is more important. And if you let your studio be run by feelings, you're going to have a bad time. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a very like logic based system that it's going to be a success. Like people still make like mistakes and like poor decisions. But, if your leadership is not able to get a good creative vision, like locked down and then build towards that, you're going to get generally a poor product. And you're also going to have your staff's going to be like disillusioned. They're going to be unmotivated, which is going to mean they produce less work. Because if you're at a studio and you just loathe going into work, you're going to be less productive. versus a team where it's like, okay, we got a clear vision, like we can do this. You have that like a charismatic leader, which was not the case here with Tales of the Shire.
Yeah.
That really gets people excited, and that gives people this energy to like create more and like be more productive and talk more and not talk too much. Like I've worked on in my younger days, I had projects where I was like so excited where I talked too much, and they were just like, look, you and these other people need to like just focus on work for like at least the middle of the day. You're distracting everyone. We didn't have cubicles, so but like we were excited, like we wanted to get stuff done. We worked hard. But the places where people are afraid of leadership, or leadership is just they don't know what they're doing, pretty much everyone at every company is going to have that same story of it was terrible to work there. I hated all this stuff. And sometimes you get a culture of fear, whether it's fear of losing your job or fear of like getting yelled at by a manager. And here it became fear of losing your job, especially once they started to downsize.
Yeah. When I joined Treyarch, like I was so at that time, Mark Lamia, who he was like the studio head during the development of like the first 3 Black Ops games. So Mark Lamia, he at that point he was no longer really the studio head. I can't remember what position they gave him. It was something like the chairman or something like that. No one really knew what he did anymore. Like he was basically like the Queen of England. Like he was there, but he mostly was at Activision, which was like a couple blocks away, and then it would just show up to Treyarch every now and then on an irregular schedule. But a lot of the developers there would tell me about how they really liked when Mark Lamia was more part of the team because he got everybody very excited. He was very charismatic. Like personally, I liked him too. We had some interactions. He was always very nice to me. He would remember very small details about my family that I would mention to him. So that made me feel like he's listening. And like overall, he's just a very nice guy. And he got like everybody had very positive things to say about him. When he no longer was in that position, though, like there was like 2 studio heads, like co-studio heads, and like I guess people didn't really dislike them. It was just they didn't have the same charisma as Mark Lamia. They didn't get people excited the same way. So some of that enthusiasm did not continue after Mark Lamia was no longer the studio head. So yeah, I totally agree with you that just getting people excited is a big deal. That's a big part of leadership.
Yep.
Let's shift over. This one thing I want to talk about is just the misuse of the IP. I know a lot of people will think, oh, this is not a big deal. Like, they just made a bad game. But the thing is, like, when it comes to entertainment at like such high quality, it becomes a cultural artifact. Like, it is something that helps form the culture. And Tolkien's work is magnificent. It is something that helps form culture, and he has like really good morals and values that he shares. Like he has actual messages in his stories, stories about bravery, doing what's right, etc. But like the point being that this can potentially be somebody's first exposure to like the Lord of the Rings IP. With that said, it can give them such a bad taste in their mouth that they don't want to explore the rest of the IP. Because when it comes to, Lord of the Rings it's a transmedia IP. So it's not just books. It's not just movies. It encompasses everything. And generally when it comes to an IP, you have like your marketing funnel that is like a straight line. It brings people straight down to the point, and there's an end, and you get the customer to buy the thing, and then that's it. Basically, awareness, interest, desire, and then the action of getting into the IP, and then it ends there. With transmedia, it's not like that. It's more of a cyclone. Like it goes in a circle. You get one person to one thing, the game, and then they're interested in the books, then they're interested in the movies. Like they go all over the place. You don't want them to stop in one spot. You want them to explore the other things as well. And like I said, this could be somebody's first exposure. They see this is a hot mess. Why do I want to check out? Well, I mean, the same with like we could talk about all the other hot messes with the Lord of the Rings IP, such as Rings of Power, that Gollum game that came out a few years ago. Or did it come out or did it get canceled? I can't remember.
Gollum came out,
It came out. Okay.
unfortunately. Yeah, I feel like as far as like did this help or hurt the IP, I think definitely hurts because like it's bad. I know there are some companies that I could see them be like 40K, for example. Games Workshop. They had a point where they were just like, screw it, you want to use the 40K IP, go for it. And they just let anyone make a game basically with the IP. And that's so we had like you could go on Steam and there's like 50 different kinds of 40K games. That franchise is in a really bad space right now. It is like they're killing their own lore and their own universe, and it's like really sad to see. But that is still a living universe. You still have people working on it. Whereas with Tolkien's work, you have his books, which are I feel like the foundation of everything, and then everything is generally based off of that foundation. And here, and with Tolkien stuff, it's foundationally it's a story of good versus evil and overcoming evil and coming together and like in self-sacrifice to overcome differences and challenges to defeat that evil. So when you think of that and then you're like, "Oh, and now it's a cozy game where you're just like feeding people in the Shire." It's like, "What the heck? How this has nothing to do with the work. You just like I don't know how much they paid for this license where like I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I understand why they sold the license because Rings of Power exists. If you're looking to make a cozy game, just saying like, oh, we'll just throw Lord of the Rings at it, like that's it's illogical. You could have had like a close enough to Lord of the Rings where it's like, oh, you're in a halfling village and then there's this wizard that comes by and then people could be like, oh, it's just like Lord of the Rings. But because they used the IP, they spent the money on the IP. Now we're going to compare it to the IP and we're just like, yeah, this is a gross use of this world.
It sounds
For
like they got the IP before they had like any like prototype or anything to present to them. Like I don't think they presented a prototype and said, "Hey, like this is a game we can make with, based on The Hobbit, or your IP or anything like that." It sounds like they got the IP first because obviously the game is a mess. I don't think they had anything presentable. But in addition to that, in the article, it mentions that they are working on a roguelike for the same IP. So
good luck.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it going from one genre to another, it's not an issue on its own because sometimes game developers can do better if they switch to a completely different genre because it's like, okay, we didn't do well. But it just with the bad leadership, they're not going to get better results.
Yeah, also this thing got it started in 2020. That this is like height of the pandemic, where like a lot of stuff got greenlit that should not have been greenlit during the pandemic. 'Cause everyone was just assuming that the growth would stay like astronomical and keep going up.
Yeah.
And even with that getting approved, then it still took them 5 years to finish this small game. And now they're like, oh, we'll come out with this roguelite, and it's like, how many years is that going to take you? Like realistically, are you going to be able to get funding for this?
And
And if you have,
I imagine
no,
that
no, go
they're
ahead.
not gonna reuse any assets either, because if it's gonna be a
I hope not.
roguelite, yeah, I hope not. But essentially, you want to reuse some sort of asset to make the next project, simpler. And the way how this has the whole cozy, the pastel colors, the very whimsical, friendly look, and then they go to a roguelite or roguelike or whatever they're trying to do. I don't think they're going to be reusing anything, especially the gameplay systems. They're not going to be reusing that.
No, I think it would be best for them to start everything fresh because, like, at least with some games, like multiplayer games, like you have like some shared systems that you might like bring over, but Tales of the Shire single player only. They're probably going to wrap up that product, stick it in like its own spot, and then just start fresh with like new ideas. That would be what I would do. I'd just be like, look, this whole thing is a hot mess. Let's plan with the experience that we've picked up from the last game, how much experience they're going to be able to carry over from that game to the next in a different genre. I don't know how much that's going to be. It may not be like next to anything. The job market's really bad right now. So they're not going to have people jumping ship like you would in a stronger job market. In a
Yeah.
stronger job market, you'd have people that were experienced that would be leaving right now. They'd say, okay, the game's done. I've got it under my belt. And they're interviewing elsewhere, especially now that the game's out and it hasn't sold a lot of copies. But they'll probably be able to keep their staff without issue, until more layoffs hit inevitably. But even with that same staff, do they have that experience to do the pivot? And I don't think I wouldn't bet on that.
Yeah.
And I'm a gambling man, so like I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. I don't wish them any ill will. It's a crummy spot to be in. I don't know anything about the studio. I don't know anything about the studio culture. I'm looking at the final product and I'm like, you guys got something done, which is impressive. Like there's a lot of games that spend years in development and then they get canceled and they never see the light of day and we never hear about it.
Yeah.
So the fact that they got something out, it's like good on you guys. You can at least be proud of yourself for shipping a game, even if that game sucks. But I don't know if this studio in its current form is going to be able to do anything. I feel like a lot of the people that work there that will stay in games, they're probably going to have to make a successful game in another studio when this place shuts down.
Yeah, my personal opinion is I don't think they're gonna last very long, especially with everybody being miserable. They don't like leadership. I imagine money is going to be very scarce for them very soon because I mean, like you mentioned, 2020, a lot of money coming in. They must have had lots of money due to like the lockdowns and also possibly ESG money to hire Sweet Baby Inc. And that's likely not coming in anymore. This one, I think they're in New Zealand though, so there's a possibility they might be still getting it. I don't know.
Be- But like a lot of investors are throwing all their money at AI moonshots right now.
Yeah.
Where it's like, do I spend money on a game studio, which a lot of game studios have terrible track records right now, versus let me throw $100 million in an AI startup that is either going to go bankrupt in 6 months or it's going to 10x my investment. So I feel like that's where most of the money's going at. And yeah, it's just been like I've talked to some people at various other locations that work in games, and they're just like funding's drying up. Like Xbox is pulling the plugs on a lot of stuff right now. So like it's really an indies market for everything because it's just these bigger studios, they're got a bunch of bad leadership, they've overhired, and instead of becoming leaner studios, they're basically just running themselves into the ground.
Yeah.
Like they'll go from like 100 people to like 300 people, and then 2 years later, they're like Microsoft or whoever is just like, yeah, we're just going to cancel your whole studio. It's easier for us to just wipe that entry off of our spreadsheet than it is to ask you to pare yourself down.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't done management, so I'm just guessing at this point, but I imagine it's probably easier for them to like just have a mass layoff and then like rehire to make smaller teams than to be like, okay, we got like this giant 300 person studio, let's split this up into five, five studios rather than just one
I think
studio.
what was it? Was it one of the Bethesda layoffs where they did something like that, where they basically told leading into it, they assigned people from the studio into other studios, and they're like, "Hey, you're going to work here temporarily," and then during layoffs, they're like, "That wasn't temporary. That was your trial period for your new job." And then they basically laid off a bunch of people and then permanently reassigned a bunch of people, which is the best case scenario for those guys
Yeah.
because like you still get to keep your job, like whether you like it or not, like you gotta support your family. But I haven't heard of like anything like that since then. I think most places they're just I'm honestly surprised Xbox is still in the game publishing business. They're just not good at it. Same
Yeah.
with Sony. Like they cannot. I don't know what they're doing. They're just burning money at this point.
Yeah, I've made
Um,
a video on like the bad management of Xbox. No one watched it. Like it has 300 views.
I guess I'm just kind of surprised that in a relatively short amount of time, we went from saying that Gollum was like the worst Lord of the Rings game to it being dethroned like so quickly. Honestly, that was pretty impressive for this studio to do that. So I guess that's my only my only observation there.
Yeah. And I just want to make it clear real quick for the viewers. Yeah, even though this might have some connection with Sweet Baby Inc., which we're not really too sure like what their involvement was. I'm not saying, go woke, go broke, the Sweet Baby Inc. Touch of death. Like it sounds like it's a problem beyond that.
Yeah, it's a symptom of the bad leadership,
Yeah.
which the article is worth a read if you want to spend a few minutes on it, because it kind of goes over kind of just how bad it was over the course of years. Yeah, it's a mess.
Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Tell me if you're going to play this game or not, or if you're going to play Gollum. And check out Ojo's channel. A link to his channel will be in the description as well as the pinned comment. I'll link to his channel, maybe a video or two of his, as well as some other videos you want to check out. Thank you. Take care. Salam.